This is the 7th video from It Can Happen Here, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to protecting the personal freedoms guaranteed to Americans by the Bill of Rights. In these videos, we are exploring the claims that Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate in 2024, wants to be a fascist dictator. In light of these claims, we have already discussed what the term fascism really means and what a dictatorship would probably mean for First Amendment freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly, the Second Amendment right to gun ownership, and the Fourth Amendment protections from unreasonable search, seizure of assets, and arrest. Today we're talking about what a fascist dictatorship would mean for our rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Coincidentally, there are 5 separate rights protected by the Fifth Amendment. First, we all know about taking the Fifth, the right not to answer questions posed by police or prosecutors. Second, while it is much less well known, the Fifth Amendment requires a grand jury indictment before prosecution for murder or another serious felony. Third, the double jeopardy clause prohibiting a second prosecution after a prior acquittal of the same crime is also in the Fifth Amendment. Fourth, the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment requires a trial or other independent legal proceeding before the government can take the life, liberty, or property of any person. The courts have also construed the due process clause to protect things like liberty of contract, marriage, or privacy. Finally, the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment requires the government to pay reasonable compensation for private property taken by the government. Some people call the Fifth Amendment the Fairness Amendment because it's all about guaranteeing that when the government interacts with the people are treated fairly. If, as some claim, Donald Trump became an American fascist dictator, would these Fifth Amendment fairness guarantees continue? Looking at other authoritarian governments, it seems that few, if any, of these fairness rights are typically provided to citizens after a fascist dictator takes control. For example, in 2013, Vladimir Putin signed a law providing that Russians may be tried multiple times for the same crime, even after a prior acquittal. Sometimes such fairness protections are more subtly withdrawn. In China, even though the privilege against self-incrimination is recognized by law, it is still common practice for Chinese police to use torture on suspects to obtain forced confessions. In Venezuela, the United Nations reports that, since Nicolas Maduro took power, a weak and non-independent judiciary has consistently ignored serious denials of due process to dissidents in connection with his government's campaign to quash dissent and criminalize political opponents. The greatest concern for our Fifth Amendment rights, however, actually comes from comments made by Donald Trump himself. Trump recently said that, if he is elected in 2024, lawyers, political operatives, donors, voters, and election officials who were involved in unscrupulous behavior in connection with his loss in the 2020 presidential elections will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels, unfortunately, never seen before in our country. In 2020, Donald Trump and his supporters brought dozens of lawsuits challenging the results of that presidential election. None of those lawsuits produced any proof of misconduct or fraud that could have changed the outcome of that election. In fact, the only credible evidence of serious election fraud that emerged is a phone call from Donald Trump to the Georgia Secretary of State when he asked him to find more votes to change the election result in that state. The realities in other fascist countries like Russia, China, and Venezuela would suggest that, if Trump did become a fascist dictator, the fairness rights provided to Americans by the Fifth Amendment would be at risk. Trump's recent threats to take revenge upon anyone who didn't support his re-election bid in 2020, including political donors and even voters, strongly indicates that a Trump dictatorship would not provide due process or other Fifth Amendment rights to his political opponents. Join us next time when we discuss what a fascist dictator might do to the Sixth Amendment's guarantees of a speedy trial, an impartial jury, the assistance of an attorney, and confrontation of the accuser in criminal cases. After that, we will discuss the rights provided by the Seventh and Eighth Amendments to the Constitution before beginning a lengthy discussion of the credibility of the claims that Donald Trump aspires to be an American fascist dictator and what we should do about it, if anything. As always, we sign off by reminding you, fascism can happen here, but only if we don't stop it. However, if we do permit fascism to creep into our lives, the precious freedoms guaranteed to us by the Bill of Rights may disappear overnight. That's something to think about.